So, I'm getting over a cold, so I hope you can hear me. I apologize for that. Adia and I have about a decade of conversation, also with Niraj. So I chose to give you a very shortened version of a presentation that I gave to the American Society of Civil Engineers on financing resiliency, which would bring in the themes that Adia asked me to talk about. So, I am a recovering Wall Street lawyer, Hong Kong merchant banker, geospatial technology finance pioneer for the federal government, the FGDC, 9/11 responder, Ashoka Fellow, and I teach a bunch of classes at Stanford, sustainable banking, ethics of finance and financial engineering, understanding the buy side of Wall Street, redesigning post-disaster finance for places like Paradise, California. And then I have a whole bunch of research, much of it through my nonprofit called Urban Logic. And I'll talk to you about a few of those things, including Good Bank. So I am many things, like most of you. And I think it's important to understand. We hear a lot in Silicon Valley about finance and fintech. To understand that the banking is about 88% of the global GDP, maybe even more. So we live in a financialized reality. And you'll hear from time to time people talk about impact investing, and just for kicks, that little dot is the size of impact investing. So there's no mathematics that I know taught at Stanford or anywhere else whereby that dot can overcome the impacts that the pie slice that is 88% produce. Okay. Next, we've talked a little about psychology. I thought it'd be good to show you the Myers-Briggs differential between the normal population and the banker population. Bankers are not normal people, which is why when you talk to a bank, they don't understand you. And they have a hard time understanding why you want to do that drug, why you want to improve that neighborhood, because they are not personalities that think the way normal people do, which is not to say they're defective. It's just to say they are self-selected to need augmented personality to understand those who would otherwise want to use the capital that they are the gatekeepers for. This is a simple view that took 4 hours. If any of you know George Springer, Professor Springer in the Aero-Astro department, speaks with a very thick Hungarian accent. He's a good friend. He said, Bruce, I want you to explain everything I need to know about banking in one slide. And this is what we came up with. So banks take money from depositors. They could be investors in a fund. The bank owes them safety. The money goes into these magical pieces of paper or claims on real assets in different forms. They could be a loan, or they could be a security that's made up of loans. Okay? Those investments of different vintages flow into real assets, into people, businesses, cities, and to the extent we don't understand or we really don't trust what bankers do, we require them to hold some of that money aside as reserves for liquidity. But ultimately, what this entire system of banking rests on, at 88% I just showed you, are the impacts that these real assets produce. Do they produce better health? Do they produce a cleaner water supply for people to not get sick as often, etc.? And so, bankers, I'm sorry, I'm not used to using your clicker as opposed to my own. Okay, great. So bankers live on spread between what we have to pay to attract the deposits, which is virtually nothing than what we get paid on loans. And then I'm suggesting that the bankers would lose less if they understood the impacts that are needed in the regions that they're making loans, so that the assets that they fund produce those impacts in proportion to the real economy's need for those assets and those impacts. Okay? And then if we had this system, we would earn the trust of the depositors, we would earn the trust of the citizens, coming back to the talk that Adi showed us of the post-2008 crisis. This has led me to propose that we need storytelling money. And what that would mean is that a depositor says, I have some goals for trust. And that's why I'm dealing with your bank. But I also am a story. Ade is a story. Larry is a story. Niraj is a story. We're each stories. And we want our stories to be expressed through how we live our financial life. But a bank deals with borrowers. Business comes to them. Coupa comes to them and says, we need to trust you. If we're going to borrow your money, we want to be handled in a certain way. But we also are a story. We source our coffee from Venezuela, which is a challenging place, but we do it, et cetera, et cetera. The bank, a sustainable bank, would put those stories together and give you the transparency to see that your money went to things that ratify your story. And the bank would reward the borrower for being clear that our community impact was, as we said it was, that we hire workers who otherwise might not be trained to be as qualified. Just so you have another picture of how I think about banking, banking is really simple. It's 6 things in 3 time frames. In the short term, we save and spend. In the longer term, we invest and borrow. And in the, I'm not sure why I have to do it, Bruce, but they tell me I'm an adult, so I should do it. We insure and we donate. And if you bought car insurance last year and hopefully didn't make a claim, you made a gift to someone who did. And so it's just a semantic difference between charity and that. And what I'm saying is, if we wrap those 6 functions in 3 time frames with the feedback loops for the impacts you're creating in each of those 6 functions, you would pay different attention to your money than the kind of attention you are paying when the tweet or the text comes to you that you owe a payment in 5 days. It would be a different experience. Now, how do I measure impacts of money? So for that, I went back and studied the origins of the periodic table in chemistry. And there are 2 things that really fascinated me about this. First, that scientists, God bless us, could respect each other's work enough to put it all in the same place and say, this is what we think we know to measure and what to call it. Okay? And then to have the humility to say, we know some other stuff exists, we don't know how to measure it or what to call it. I mean, that's profound for that age and our age. Well, over time, oops, if I can go backwards. Yes.
Okay.
Over time, we changed the periodic table. We improved it.
Oh, I see.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you, Adam. We improved it. These are different weights of the same elements. So we measure things much more precisely. And we filled in the blanks and added even more. And we continue to do that. So it's a very dynamic collective intelligence device. Well, if we wanted to build a periodic table of quality of life elements for that layer I showed you of the impacts underneath the entire financial system, where could we start? We could start, if we wanted, with health. And we'd say, well, Bruce, for 100,000 Californians, we want them to live so many years. It's called the DAILYs, the Disability Adjusted Life Years. And we measure our progress in health by how we've achieved that. And we could say, let's just invest in drug discovery, or let's just invest in hospitals. And it might be a very expensive proposition to improve per 100,000 people their DAILYs. So we very quickly see, well, urban systems, if we have less indoor pollution for houses, if we, have clean water, we can improve the health of people. We then might look at what's the source of energy that they use. Is it creating more pollution? Is it clean? And then we'd look at their climate change exposures. And in a very few mouse clips, I've given you the thesis of the periodic table, and I'll explain how we're building it. These cells each have adjacencies to each other, much like the Roche diagram that we just saw. And if I want to drive up or down the cost of achieving the goals of any one cell, I can connect it or disconnect it from the other cells that have an impact. So if I improve water quality and sanitation, my cost of health clinics goes down. If I improve education, my costs of crime go down, and my costs of economic development go down because people can earn better jobs. So this we call adjacencies. The value of a particular cell in relation to the entire table, I call FVAR, or functional values at risk. So this borrows from finance theory. When you're an asset manager, you're building a portfolio, you're asking yourself, do I add a stock, do I sell a stock? Do I add a bond, do I sell a bond? Based on the recession or expansion cycle you might be in or might be expecting. That VAR, value at risk, is transportable as a theory into this as a functional value at risk. When I cleaned up the water, I just reduced the cost of healthcare. And I might have reduced the cost of a few other things. So think of it as the spice in soup, that each quality of life element has a certain value. The credit score that I've created, I call sustainable resiliency, is the likelihood that every cell in the table will improve by 10% over 10 years, which then lets us, I told you I'm a recovering Wall Street lawyer, lets us go to the bond markets, not bomb markets, bond markets, and explain to the bondholders that 10 years from now, it will be this much cheaper to run California or Palo Alto or Kansas City than it is today because we've increased the functional value at risk assertions. So we're building this from the budget data of the 50 states, and we're looking at how much they've spent in operating and capital expenditures, and what the KPIs are that basically justified getting that money to spend in the first place. So instead of the gears or the other impact assessment SDGs that you hear about, this is not voodoo economics. This is real fiscal economics of the money that the government would otherwise have to spend to produce the impacts that we can organize through public and private means. So, here. Ade asked me to show you in one slide the entire financial system. Here it is. So, in 2010, 2 years after the financial crisis, the Federal Reserve Bank in New York decided to analyze what's called the shadow banking system. Shadow banking system is everything that the regulators of banks don't traditionally oversee. So there are certain insurance companies, there are hedge funds, there are private equity, there are tons and tons. And so what they wanted to do, and I know it's too tiny to see, but I've given you in the box I've uploaded this report so you could actually see it. And what they realized is the bank regulators only regulate this top corridor of people who have money today and don't need it, and people who want money today and can pay it back tomorrow. That's the only slice of the financial system that they regulate. But there are risk transfers and value transfers going through these other hands. And I won't, this is one of the things we teach in the buy-side class. All this system is doing is 4 things: transforming risk, return, asset type, and maturity, how long the investment is out there. And if I took this as a circuit board to our EE department, our electrical engineering department, it would not look like this. If I said, I want you to design a circuit that does 4 things, it'd be much, much simpler. But it's important to understand that there are incentives for why community development gets funded or not, who would want to hold that investment under what terms, how do innovators get funded. The answers are in this wiring diagram. I thought it'd be important to explain to you that cities finance themselves through 2 types of bonds, major types. One are called GEO, or general obligation bonds. And these are the bonds that are secured by the taxes that are raised by the city. And you'll see in rating these bonds and giving a safety and soundness rating to the bonds, Moody's and Fitch and Standard & Poor's take 30% of the rating comes from how will what you're financing grow the local economy. The other type of bonds are called project finance bonds. And these are, you might have a hospital, or you might have a stadium, or you have even a school. And you raise the money, you secure the bond with the revenues from that asset. But what you won't see in this slide that you saw in the prior slide was the value the asset has in the local economy. So the project finance bondholder says, I don't care about what happens to the rest of the economy. I've got an asset. And I'm assuming, obviously, that asset will be used by its local economy, but I don't get any rating significance to that. This is a big problem, because it means that if you're looking at the resilience of a city, and if the city is increasing its reliance on project finance and not general obligations bonds, it's getting less and less credit for being a resilient city. I thought you should see that, according to Munich Re, in 2017, there were 340 billion of natural disasters around the world, of which 200 were uninsured, 2/3, and they were uninsured in different proportion depending on which continent we're talking about. So Africa, 87% uninsured. Asia, 92%. Australia, 45%. Europe, 65%. Now, this is a little deceptive because you didn't have the same rate of natural disasters everywhere. But it gives you a sense that the demands on capital with an increase in climate change and other forces on natural disasters will tend to absorb insurability and will make the need for resilience in whatever we build much, much greater, right? Because the insurers are not going to pick up the tab as often. I thought you should see that in consumer finance, we talk a lot about fintech, we talk about remittances and payments and all the things you can do with a digital wallet. These are the 5 tiers of households in America. The bottom 20% owe 25% more than they have in net worth. The second tier owe 80% of their net worth in debt. The middle owe half of their net worth. The next to the top owe 25% of their net worth. So when we are talking about fintech and consumer finance, if we extend this red, these people are going to be even poorer, faster, which is why I teach the ethics of finance and financial engineering at Stanford. I would like to get these folks so that they're not, so this bar doesn't exist, so that they don't have negative net worth, even though we were able to give them loans at a faster rate. This is more disasters happening. I thought you should see this one last thing. The American Society of Civil Engineers, every couple of years, goes to Congress and says, here is the report card for all the infrastructure in America. The roads, the bridges, the airports, the whole thing. And the grade that they've given consistently is D or D+. And the cost to put the nation's infrastructure is going up relatively logarithmically. That's just to put the existing infrastructure in good repair, not to add to it. So you have a fragile infrastructure under highly stressed climate change conditions with cities that are financing themselves with more project finance debt. This is a pretty tough picture. Now, I proposed that we create resilience finance to maximize the use of the periodic table intersections that I showed you. And what that requires, in part, is a huge amount of cross-disciplinary understanding. It requires that the CE, the civil engineers, adopt a standard for what is a resilient city, which they found odd that I would say that they're the ones that do it, but they're the ones with the legal chop under our legislation to go to the buildings department, which is what the bankers would rely on to know that we're lending for resilient cities. You would know this. What else did I have? One other asset, one other thing that I thought I should share with you is, no, sorry. We build cities, and we tend to forget how we built them. We go through a constant learning curve, or relearning curve. When I sold the General Motors building in New York for GM, I spent about 6 months of my life regenerating the building department file for the General Motors building, which is a fairly large building at 59th and 5th Avenue. Because the file had been parsed down, God bless the contractors, to about that thick over 25 years. And so I proposed in civil and environmental engineering that we create a RIOS, a real estate operating system, where the decisional history of how the building was built, how it was approved to be built that way, who was responsible for changing it and bringing it back to whatever condition after they rented it, all of this could be remembered. And I, I don't want to go too far into this, but this is a way of thinking about problems, very much like Ade has asked us to do here, that says a problem of repeating the crisis moment can be, redesigned, and we don't have to throw away all the knowledge that we gain every time we change a building. We could keep remembering, and the cost then of adapting that building to a new use would go down as we go through time. Bankers then would have, as their due diligence, a digital key to the file that the building uses to recall its memory. We can't have smart buildings without the memory to remember how they got built. So I'll just leave you with a bunch of things. I know I went fast, but hopefully that's good. Okay.